The perfect illusion. To anyone looking in, the protagonist's life was a masterpiece of success. At work, their name was synonymous with excellence, a rising star who never missed a deadline, always delivered results, and radiated confidence in every meeting. On social media, their world sparkled with carefully curated images of exotic vacations, gourmet meals, and captions oozing positivity. They had become the person others envied, the one people referred to as having it all together. But behind the polished facade was a different story. Each accolade felt like a new brick in a wall, trapping them in an exhausting game of expectations. They would sit for hours crafting the perfect Instagram post, not because they wanted to share joy, but because they feared being irrelevant. At work, every success was chased by the gnawing fear that the next task might reveal their incompetence. Their life wasn't a celebration of achievement, it was a relentless pursuit to outrun self-doubt. The breaking point came on a quiet Thursday night. The protagonists sat alone in their apartment, the glow of a laptop illuminating a half-finished project. Notifications buzzed relentlessly on their phone, a colleague's email, a friend's tag on a post, a reminder for tomorrow's meeting. Each sound felt like a jab, a reminder of how much they had to keep up with. They paused, staring blankly at the screen as a familiar heaviness crept in. The air felt suffocating, the silence deafening. Without warning, tears streamed down their face. It wasn't a dramatic outburst, but a quiet, desperate surrender. They weren't crying about the project or the notifications, they were mourning the life they pretended to live. For the first time, they admitted a truth that had been lurking for years: the perfection they portrayed wasn't real. It was a carefully constructed illusion, and it was breaking them. The unexpected encounter. The next day, still feeling raw from the breakdown, the protagonist found themselves wandering aimlessly through the city. Their usual routine, gym, coffee shop, straight to the office, felt unbearable. Instead, their feet carried them to a small, tucked-away bookstore they'd passed 100 times but never entered. Inside, the smell of aged paper and the quiet murmur of flipping pages felt oddly comforting. They meandered through the aisles, brushing fingers over spines of books on everything from philosophy to cookery. Nothing really stood out until they turned a corner and saw it. Bright orange with bold, unapologetic lettering, the subtle art of not giving a FCK. The title hit them like a slap. It was crass, loud, and utterly unlike anything they would normally consider. For a moment, they wanted to walk away, dismiss it as some attention-seeking gimmick. But their gaze lingered, drawn in by the sheer audacity of it. They picked it up hesitantly, almost as if someone might judge them for holding it. Skimming the first few lines, they felt an odd mix of offense and intrigue. The tone was blunt, even abrasive, yet there was a strange allure to its honesty. It seemed to say the very things they had been too scared to admit: life isn't about being perfect, and you can't care about everything. As they flipped through the pages, their skepticism softened. A line stood out like a beacon: you have a limited number of FCKs to give. Choose them wisely. Something about it resonated deeply. They carried the book to the register, feeling a tinge of rebellion. This wasn't the kind of self-help book their co-workers raved about, or the sort of intellectual piece they could show off on Instagram. It was raw, confrontational, and completely out of their comfort zone. Back home, sitting on the same couch where they'd broken down the night before, they opened the first chapter. A part of them hoped it would be just another distraction, something to momentarily numb the discomfort. Instead, it became the first crack in the armor they had spent years building. A dangerous liberation. The first few chapters felt like a breath of fresh air, or perhaps a gale force wind, blowing away years of built-up tension. The book didn't sugarcoat anything. It wasn't a soft-spoken guide to happiness, it was a sharp, unapologetic manifesto. The author's voice was brutally honest, at times almost confrontational, but that was precisely why it resonated. For the first time in years, the protagonist felt something they couldn't quite name: relief, liberation. They weren't sure. But as they read, a strange permission seemed to unfold in their mind. They didn't have to care about everything. The idea was intoxicating. They began testing the waters almost immediately. When a co-worker dumped a last-minute task on their desk, they didn't immediately say yes. Instead, they calmly explained their workload and suggested the co-worker handle it themselves. The stunned look on the co-worker's face was oddly satisfying. Later, when scrolling through social media, they skipped posting their usual polished update about their productive day. Instead, they logged off completely. It felt like rebellion, even though it was such a small act. But the high didn't last. As they read deeper into the book, the euphoria began to wane, replaced by an unsettling realization. The book wasn't about abandoning responsibilities or throwing caution to the wind. It was about owning them, choosing what mattered and accepting the consequences. This was where the cracks began to form. Letting go of meaningless obligations was liberating, yes, but it forced them to confront an uncomfortable truth: much of their life was built on things that didn't truly matter. One evening, they sat staring at their calendar, once a source of pride, now a glaring reminder of how much energy they had spent on things they didn't care about. Meetings they didn't need to attend. Social events they dreaded. Even the job they had once celebrated as a dream now felt hollow. Liberation, they realized, wasn't as simple as not giving a FCK. It required something much harder: the courage to decide what truly deserved their care and the willingness to let go of everything else. The Mirror of Truth. By the fourth chapter, the book no longer felt like a casual read. It had become a relentless mirror, reflecting back truths the protagonist had spent years avoiding. Each page seemed to peel back another layer of their carefully constructed life, exposing what lay beneath. One afternoon, as they sat in their apartment, the sunlight streaming through the window felt almost accusatory. The book rested in their lap, open to a passage that stung like an open wound: our values determine what we find meaningful. But too often, we inherit those values without ever questioning if they're truly ours. The words lingered, heavy and unshakable. They started to ask themselves questions they had never dared to consider. Why did they always push themselves to achieve more? Why did they say yes to obligations they despised? Why did they constantly seek validation, even from people whose opinions they didn't respect? For the first time, they realized that much of what they cared about wasn't theirs at all. It had been handed down to them by their parents, who always praised hard work over happiness. By teachers, who emphasized achievement over curiosity. By a society that equated worth with productivity. Their phone buzzed on the coffee table, breaking their train of thought. It was a text from their father: "Proud of you for the promotion. Keep pushing." Normally, this would have filled them with a rush of pride. Now, it felt hollow. That evening, they sat with their journal, scribbling furiously. Memories came flooding back: childhood piano recitals, academic awards, even their college graduation. Each moment was tinged with the same theme: the need to impress, to be perfect, to make someone else proud. But never themselves. The book had shifted from a rebellious anthem to a painful reckoning. Letting go of meaningless obligations was one thing, but questioning their values was a deeper, more unnerving process. If their current values weren't truly theirs, then who were they without them? The thought was both terrifying and liberating. The shattered identity. The confrontation with their best friend wasn't planned. It began with an offhand comment over coffee, something about the protagonist's perfect life. Normally, they would have laughed it off, maybe even basked in the compliment. But today, after days of introspection spurred by the book, it struck a nerve. Perfect, they said, their voice sharper than intended. Do you really think that's what my life is? Their friend blinked, taken aback. Well, yeah. You've got everything figured out. Your career, your place, the way people look up to you. Isn't that what you wanted? The words were meant as reassurance, but they felt like a blow. Something inside the protagonist snapped. I've been living a lie, they blurted out, the words tumbling out before they could stop them. All of it, the job, the achievements, the image I put out, it's not me. It's never been me. Their friend's face shifted from confusion to something darker, doubt, maybe even suspicion. What are you talking about? You've worked so hard for this. If it's not you, then who are you? That was the question, wasn't it the one they had been circling for weeks without an answer? I don't know, they admitted, their voice breaking. But I'm tired of pretending. I'm tired of chasing things that don't make me happy just because I'm supposed to. For a moment, there was silence. Then their friend laughed, a bitter, incredulous sound. You've always been dramatic, they said, shaking their head. Do you realize how ungrateful you sound? Some of us would kill to have what you have. Maybe stop overthinking and just enjoy it. The betrayal wasn't in the words themselves but in the underlying message, I don't believe you. The conversation ended quickly after that, both of them retreating into strained politeness. But the damage was done. As the protagonist walked home, their mind raced with 1,000 doubts. If their closest friend didn't understand, then who would? Did anyone truly know them, or had they become so good at performing that their real self had disappeared entirely? That night, they sat alone in their apartment, staring at the book. The words on the page blurred as tears filled their eyes. The person they had spent years building, the perfect version of themselves, was crumbling. And with it, so was their sense of identity. The catalyst for change. The book's pivotal chapter hit them like a bolt of lightning. The author posed a haunting question: if you lost everything you've built, would you still feel worthy of love? The words reverberated in their mind like an accusation. They had spent their entire life constructing an identity designed to be admired by bosses, friends, strangers on social media, but what lay beneath it? Was there anything there at all? They couldn't shake the thought, even as they tried to go about their day. At dinner with their family that evening, the tension finally broke. Their mother's voice was soft but edged with concern. You've been so quiet lately. Is everything okay? Normally, they would have smiled and assured her everything was fine. But not tonight. The question had opened a floodgate, and the words poured out before they could stop them. I don't know if I'm okay, they admitted, their voice trembling. I feel like I've spent my whole life chasing things that don't matter. I don't even know if I'm happy, or if I've just convinced myself I should be. Their father frowned, setting down his fork. Where's this coming from? You've always been driven, successful. We're proud of you. That's the problem. They snapped, louder than they intended. I've been living for your approval, for everyone else's approval. But I don't know if I've ever done anything just for me. The room fell silent, the air thick with tension. And then, their father said something that changed everything. You're not the first in this family to feel that way. The words hung in the air, cryptic and unsettling. "What does that mean?" they asked, their heart pounding. He hesitated, glancing at their mother, who nodded reluctantly. "Your grandfather. He was a lot like you, always striving, always trying to prove himself. But it came at a cost." They leaned forward, desperate for answers. "What cost?" Their mother's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "He lost himself, just like you're afraid of doing. He built a life he thought he should want, but in the end, he regretted it all. We never wanted that for you." The revelation left them stunned. For years, they had viewed their family as a source of pressure, the architects of the values they had blindly followed. But now, they saw something else: fear. Their parents had been projecting their own wounds, trying to shield them from repeating the mistakes of the past without realizing they were creating new ones. That night, they returned to the book with renewed determination. The question still lingered: would you still feel worthy of love? But now, it felt less like an accusation and more like a challenge. They didn't have the answer yet, but they were starting to see the path forward. It wouldn't be easy, and it wouldn't be quick, but it was time to stop running from the truth. The values unveiled. For the first time in their life, the protagonists stood face to face with the void they had been running from. The words from the book continued to echo: to care about something deeply, you must stop caring about everything else. But what did they truly care about? The question felt as expansive as the sky, yet as suffocating as a shrinking room. In the days that followed, they began to peel back the layers of their carefully constructed life. Each revelation was like an artifact unearthed, a fragment of a self they hardly recognized. The awards on their wall, the accolades at work, even their closest relationships, all once sources of pride, suddenly felt hollow. One evening, sitting in their apartment surrounded by reminders of their perfect life, they made a bold decision. They grabbed a notebook and began writing down every value they thought defined them: success, recognition, financial stability, loyalty. Then, with brutal honesty, they added a second column: why does this matter to me? For hours, they wrestled with the list, crossing out anything that wasn't truly theirs. Success was rooted in a desperate need to validate themselves to a father who had always pushed them to be better. Recognition was tangled in their fear of being invisible, a shadow of their teenage years. By the time they finished, only 3 values remained: authenticity, connection, and growth. The simplicity of it was startling. Everything else they had been chasing was a facade, a performance to meet expectations they had never agreed to in the first place. The next day, the repercussions of their unmasking hit hard. At work, they were called into a meeting with their boss. They had been struggling to maintain their former energy, and their boss wasn't happy. "You've been distracted," their boss said, tapping a pen against the desk. "If you can't meet the expectations of this role, we might need to reassess your position here." Normally, they would have apologized, promised to redouble their efforts. But not this time. "You're right," they said, their voice calm but resolute. "I've been distracted because I'm realizing this job doesn't align with who I am anymore." The words felt like a punch, but also like liberation. By the end of the meeting, they had officially resigned. It was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. Later that night, doubt crept in. What if they had made a mistake? What if their decision was reckless? But as they flipped through the book one more time, a line caught their eye: pain is part of the process of finding what truly matters. It was painful to let go of the stability their job had offered, but it was also necessary. For the first time, they felt like they were living, not just existing. Their values weren't just concepts on a page anymore. They were becoming the foundation for a life they could call their own, even if it meant starting from scratch. The ultimate test. The protagonist's life was beginning to settle into a new rhythm, one defined by authenticity rather than performance. They had embraced their chosen values of authenticity, connection, and growth, even though the path was uncertain and, at times, lonely. Then, as life so often does, it threw a curveball. An email arrived from an old colleague. The subject line read, "Exciting opportunity, let us reconnect." Curious, they opened it. The message outlined a lucrative job offer, one that would catapult them back to the top of their industry. The role promised not just financial stability but also the prestige they had willingly walked away from. But there was a catch. The job would require them to revert to their old ways, long hours, relentless networking, and playing by rules that demanded perfection and people-pleasing. The role didn't align with the new values they had painstakingly carved out for themselves. The offer stirred a storm within them. They spent the evening pacing their apartment, torn between the comfort of familiarity and the unknown of their chosen path. Questions plagued their mind. Am I being foolish to reject this? What if I can't succeed on my terms? Seeking clarity, they returned to the subtle art of not giving a FCK. As they flipped through its pages, one line stood out: the only way to overcome pain is to learn to bear it. Growth comes not from avoiding struggle but embracing it. In that moment, they realized the struggle wasn't about the job offer itself, it was about the fear of letting go of who they used to be. They weren't just rejecting a job, they were rejecting the identity that had once defined their entire existence. The next day, they attended a meeting with the hiring manager to discuss the position further. Dressed in simple attire that reflected their new sense of self, they walked into the office with both excitement and trepidation. The manager greeted them warmly. "We'd love to have you on board," she said, sliding an offer letter across the desk. "You're exactly what we're looking for." They took a deep breath, their fingers tracing the edge of the paper. For a moment, the room felt heavy with expectation. "I appreciate the offer," they began, carefully choosing their words, "but I've realized that I can't give my best to something that doesn't align with who I am anymore." The manager's expression flickered with surprise. "Are you sure this is a rare opportunity?" "I'm sure," they said, their voice steady. "I've spent too much of my life trying to fit into roles that weren't right for me. I can't do it anymore." Walking out of the office, they felt an unfamiliar mix of fear and freedom. It was the ultimate test, a challenge to trust their newfound values over the comfort of their old life. That evening, they reflected on their decision. It wasn't easy, but for the first time, they felt truly in control, not of external circumstances, but of their response to them. The ultimate test wasn't the job offer. It was the choice to honor their truth, even when the stakes were high. The shocking realization. After the confrontation with the job offer, the protagonist believed they had reached a turning point. They were navigating life with their newly discovered values, leaving behind the shadows of external validation. But even as they walked this path, a lingering unease remained, as if something fundamental was still unsettled. One evening, exhausted from the day, they sat with the subtle art of not giving a FCK in their lap, aimlessly flipping through the worn pages. The book had become their compass, yet it felt as though they had missed something vital. A passage caught their eye, a sentence that had seemed insignificant on their first reading: "The truth isn't always comfortable, but it's the only thing that sets you free." The words sparked a cascade of memories, bringing them back to moments they had long buried, the times they had compromised their integrity, chased applause, and abandoned their own desires to fit into a mold that wasn't theirs. The realization hit like a lightning bolt. They had been so focused on constructing a new life that they had overlooked a glaring truth. Their journey wasn't just about letting go of old values, it was about confronting the lies they had told themselves along the way. The most painful realization was that they had crafted their identity not out of authenticity, but out of fear. Fear of rejection, fear of failure, fear of being unworthy. Every achievement, every relationship, every decision had been a desperate attempt to outrun that fear. That night, they sat down to write a letter not to anyone else, but to themselves. In the letter, they confessed the truths they had been too afraid to face. They had allowed societal expectations to dictate their life. They had mistaken perfection for love and approval for worth. They had been their own harshest critic, perpetuating the very narrative they sought to escape. Tears blurred the ink as they wrote, but with each word, the weight they carried began to lift. It wasn't an easy process, but it was a necessary one. They realized the book hadn't just given them permission to care less about superficial things, it had given them permission to care deeply about the things that truly mattered, starting with themselves. As they signed the letter, they felt an unexpected clarity. This wasn't just a step in their journey, it was a revelation. The book wasn't merely a guide, it was a mirror, reflecting the raw, unfiltered truth of who they were. They folded the letter and placed it in the book's pages, as if sealing an unspoken pact. This was their turning point, not because they had read the book, but because they had finally allowed its lessons to rewrite their internal narrative. The shocking realization wasn't about what the book taught them, it was about what it forced them to see within themselves. The revolution begins. The audience was silent. Rows of faces, some expectant, others skeptical, gazed at the protagonist as they stood on the stage, not as a polished icon of perfection but as a person stripped bare of pretense. The stark vulnerability in their demeanor was both unsettling and magnetic. For the first time, they weren't standing there to impress anyone. This wasn't about accolades or applause, it was about truth. Taking a deep breath, they began. Not long ago, my life looked perfect on paper. I had the job, the recognition, the curated posts, and the endless pursuit of validation. But let me tell you something, that version of me was a lie. A lie I told myself so convincingly, I almost believed it. The crowd shifted, intrigued. I thought happiness was about having it all. But in chasing that illusion, I lost the one thing that mattered, myself. Then, I stumbled upon a book with a title that was both jarring and liberating: The Subtle Art of Not Giving a F*ck. At first, I thought it would tell me how to let go of the little things. Instead, it forced me to confront the big things, the truths I'd buried so deep I didn't even recognize them anymore. They paused, their gaze sweeping the room. This book didn't change my life because it handed me easy answers. It changed my life because it demanded hard questions. What do you truly value? What are you holding on to that isn't yours? Who would you be if you let it go? The room was still, the air electric with anticipation. I learned that not giving a fck doesn't mean apathy. It means choosing what matters. It means saying no to the noise, the expectations, the fears that don't serve you. It means risking everything for what's real. A single tear slipped down their cheek, and they didn't bother to hide it. I walked away from a career that defined me but didn't fulfill me. I faced the lies I told myself and the ones others told me. And now, I stand here, not as someone who has it all figured out, but as someone who's finally okay with that. Their voice rose, steady and strong. So, I'm asking you, what are you holding on to that isn't yours? A dream that doesn't fit, a relationship that drains you, a version of yourself that's been shaped by someone else's hands. They leaned forward, their vulnerability a challenge, a dare. Let it go. Rewrite the story. Not for anyone else, but for you. The silence lingered for a heartbeat before the crowd erupted into applause. But this time, the protagonist didn't measure their worth by the clapping hands or the nodding heads. The revolution wasn't in the audience, it was in themselves. They smiled, not at the crowd but at the person they had become. The journey had been painful, messy, and far from perfect. But for the first time, it felt real. And that was enough.